Hi there, Professor Zeeb here, and welcome into another video lecture. This time we're going to talk about marriage. I know we've talked about it in previous chapters, but we're going to look at how marriage is involved with our middle adulthood stage and how things kind of change and some special concerns of that. So let's get into it here and go to our slides. All right, so marriage and middle age. We're going to find that a lot of times there's a trend for marriage to change during this time of our life in middle age or middle adulthood. All right, so let's look at what the research says. Okay, so in terms of marriage and middle age, security, loyalty, and mutual emotional interest are more important or seem to be more important during middle adulthood than, say, previously in young adulthood. So as you can imagine with most relationships, as our romantic loves fades, you guys remember we talked about romantic love and affectionate love, where we said romantic love is more the passionate version of that, where the affectionate is more about companionship and more deeply seated, if you would. So as that romantic love starts to fade, as the relationship matures, the affectionate love is probably going to increase, and certainly by the time you're this age, we would see the maturity of that the marriage has now been well established and is going deeper than ever before. And so it seems that these things are probably more important as the relationships mature. So being secure and loyal, having a mutual emotional interest. Once again, a lot of that sort of surrounds the affectionate love more than the passionate romantic type. So it would go to follow that these things would sort of become more important during this time as that relationship changes and evolves. Most married individuals are satisfied with their marriages during midlife, if we look at the research and believe that. And so some of the things that seem to be important of that are engaging in mutual activities, and that seems to be really important. So in other words, I mean, obviously you've gotten past the sex part of it and just the sort of, the really spark of the beginning of the relationship. And now, as things start to settle down and you get into that pattern of raising your kids and in your career, it is so important to take time out and do things with each other, to have a date night, for example, every now and then, but also to be able to do things together mutually. So I have an example of that. There's a couple that was really close to our family growing up. And I remember that when they were around this age, one of the things that they would do in their spare time, their kids were older and had moved out and so forth. And so they were middle-aged. And one of the things they would love to do is they got into ballroom dancing. I thought that was such a cool thing. It's kind of an unusual thing. They both love music and dancing. So this is a great way for them to kind of grow together and mature and develop by enjoying that hobby together. So I think that's so important. We all have our own sort of interests and focus in hobbies and things like that, but it's so important to find something that you both can kind of connect to, and that would obviously help you grow as a couple. So I think that's a great thing. Research also shows that positive marital qualities are linked to better health, for both spouses. So there seems to be a connection between having a really good marriage and being satisfied with your marriage and having good health. Obviously, when you're having to deal with a sick partner, that can create tension, or if there's other problems involved, sometimes stress obviously can affect our health, as we've learned in this unit, in other chapters and so forth. So they have found in this particular study cited in the textbook there that positive marital quality seems to be beneficial, not only to the relationship, but to our own health for both spouses. I think that was an awesome finding there. Divorce in middle adulthood may be more positive in some ways and more negative in others. So obviously to a lot of things, there are pros and cons. Let's just kind of go over those. So let's look at some of the more positive aspects of getting divorced in middle adulthood compared to, say, when you first meet or a few years after you become married in your 20s or something. So number one, the opportunity to simplify your life by disposing of your possessions. In other words, kind of a weird viewpoint, but this may give you an opportunity to kind of think about those things and to divvy things up in terms of your possessions. It may be just a more convenient way of doing that and using that divorce as a tool to sort of go through that. You could also argue, but for most people, when they're married in middle age, that their children are now older, they're more mature and psychologically able to handle the divorce. So in other words, it's a lot easier on the kids, you could argue. I mean, obviously, it may not be a nice thing, of course, I'm not saying that. But in terms of the effect on children, as we learned earlier, that young children are really affected by divorce. And so if the kids are older, they may be more prepared for that or able to handle it from a psychological perspective. So a lot of times when couples break up during middle age, they may be searching for things that do not include the spouse. So this would enable you to sort of do that. So in other words, maybe the marriage was preventing you from finding your true self, or aspiring and reaching your goals. Maybe for some reason that was holding you back. So now this gives you that opportunity to really master life's purpose for you, and gives you that, enables you to be able to do that where before you could not. So sometimes there is a positive spin to that. Let's look at the negative side of the coin here of divorce in middle age. A lot of times it's viewed as betrayal, because you've been with this person in most cases a long time. You've committed to them, you've spent all this time, you've invested all these things with this person, including probably raising a family, that when you actually break up, it's often perceived as this ultimate betrayal. I mean, how could you do this to me? Looking at all the things that we've done together, raising our kids and having all these experiences. So you can imagine how it would feel like betrayal after several years, compared to maybe if it was just a couple years after the marriage. A lot of people report that, in the research, that if I get divorced in middle age, it's kind of like I'm failing the golden years of my life. I mean, a lot of people are really set financially. It's can be a time where things are really good for you personally in many different ways. And so this may be looked at as a failure during this time, when this kind of stuff should not be happening, theoretically, if you buy into that. All right, so now we're going to look at some increasing divorce rate in middle-aged adults. And so there's several reasons why this actually could be. Number one, a lot of people wait until their kids grow up to actually go through the divorce. So maybe there was tension before this, and so they just sort of stayed together for the kids to prevent them from being scarred by the divorce, for example. So maybe they've just waited, and then once the kids have left, flown the nest, so to speak, it gives them that opportunity to divorce. So that may be why there could be a spike or a cluster of divorces in middle age. You could also argue that it's the changing views of women. So it's less of a stigma for a woman to be a single parent or to be divorced compared to what it was in the past. A lot of women are more financially independent of men now. We've talked about that before. So certainly by the time you're middle age, when you're well into your career, you're probably making good money in most cases, is that after the divorce, you understand that you're completely fine. And so this may be a vehicle for you to sort of pursue that, to end the marriage and thus be self-sufficient financially and be able to do that. Lastly, you have to kind of factor in remarriage. This is kind of an interesting point. So the divorce rate is a lot higher for people who've been divorced before. So remarriage definitely factors in. So for example, the divorce rate is 2.5 times higher for a second marriage. So I guess the point here we're saying is that if you're now middle age, the odds of you've been married before are much higher than, say, when you're in your 20s. And we know that people who get divorced are more likely to get divorced again than the first time around. So that may be another reason why the numbers kind of spike potentially during middle age, is because you have to factor in people that maybe just aren't not in it for the long haul, or unable to commit for a long period of time to someone, and are more likely to end the relationship, and then that factors in the statistics. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. So once again, the divorce rate is about 2.5 times higher for second marriages, and often gets higher as we go down the line and so forth. All right, so the next thing I want to cover, guys, is the happy marriage. So we've been focusing on divorce here. Let's keep it a little bit more positive. And we're going to look at some research that shows some connections to factors related to a happy marriage. And so in this case, we're saying, wow, it's been lasting. You're still married. Things are going good. So what are some of those factors? All right, so some common reasons for a happy marriage. And I 100% agree with these. Friendship. I mean, obviously, you not only are attracted to that person, but they are your friend, they are a companion. So remember, it's some of that different type of love, the affectionate love that we've talked about. Obviously, that would factor into having a good, solid relationship, is that you actually like this person, not just a sexual level or a physical attractive thing. It's more that you agree with them and you get along with them and you're a companion. Obviously, love is going to be a big thing. So having a loving relationship is important, but also having similar interests and backgrounds, as we said before. So you see the connections to some of the stuff we've already mentioned. How well roles are balanced within the family. In this case, what I mean by roles are social roles. How are those balanced in the family? In other words, in my opinion, if one person is pulling all the weight, they're taking care of the kids, they're the breadwinner, they're doing all the chores around the house, they're doing everything, that is a recipe for disaster in a relationship, because it's not fair. Relationships have to be viewed as sort of almost like a business transaction at times, where both parties have to be satisfied. And so if those roles are not balanced accordingly, you can see why it would create tension. So certainly a good marriage is one where both partners are kind of contributing and working as a team to balance the demands. Obviously, as a parent and a spouse and someone who works, there's a lot of demand and stress involved. And so you have to find some way to kind of balance those stresses in the relationship. And I think that's kind of possibly speaking to that. Okay, so this last one here is the wife's income level. I thought this was interesting. So what we have found is that if we have a situation where the wife, so let's say it's a man and a woman who are married, if the woman is earning more than the man, and the man is very traditional, he has very traditional values, we have found that that is related to higher dissatisfaction. In other words, they're not as happy in the marriage as if they didn't care about those things. Do you guys see why that would be? If you have a traditional gender role sort of thing going on, a lot of men believe that they should be the breadwinner. I'm the one that's responsible for the family and bringing in money. And therefore, if you're earning more than I am, then that makes me feel less of a person, if you believed in that. So you can see how that would create tension. Obviously, if you don't care about those things, it's not going to matter. But it seems to matter most when we have very traditional husbands who feel sort of inferior in a way, and they want to be dominant, and this creates, this is like a threat to their ability to be the top dog in the relationship. So you can see why that would probably create tension. So point is, there's a lot of moving parts here, a lot of things to kind of consider with marriage, and a lot of different angles to kind of look at with a middle-aged marriage. All right, guys, so that will conclude our lecture. Hopefully you guys are finding the material interesting and relatable in some way, and will be able to use it in your life in some way. So please progress to the next step in the class. Thanks, guys.